Somerset, April 1816. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Moorland Hall cast pale golden rectangles across the marble floors, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness like memories suspended in time. Helena Josephine Winters stood in the doorway of the grand ballroom, her gloved hands pressed against the cool doorframe, and wondered how she had found the strength to return to this place that had been her prison for 7 years. At 28, she understood what it meant to survive without truly living. She had been Countess of Moorland once, mistress of this vast estate with its endless corridors and cold bedchambers. She had presided over dinners where no one spoke to her except in politeness, and she walked gardens where even the flowers seemed to turn away. Her marriage to Julian Winters had been a transaction, nothing more. His father had needed the alliance with her family, and she had needed escape from her own cold household. However, the lack of an heir was not her failure, though she bore the blame. It was the result of Julian's neglect, for he rarely visited her bedchamber, preferring his mistresses and leaving his wife in solitary silence. What she had found instead was a different kind of captivity. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago at the cottage where she now lived, delivered by a liveried footman who had once bowed to her as his mistress. The heavy cream paper, embossed with the Moorland crest, announced the wedding of Julian Winters, Earl of Moorland, to Lady Victoria Sinclair. And there, at the bottom in Julian's sharp handwriting, was a postscript that made her hands tremble even now. Your presence would demonstrate to all that we part as civilized individuals. Surely you can manage such grace. It was a challenge, a dare, and an opportunity for him to display his magnanimity before society while humiliating her one final time. She should have refused. Dr. Marcus Haverford had begged her not to come. His kind gray eyes filled with concern as he stood in the doorway of his cottage where she had found refuge these past 6 months. But Helena had learned something in her years of silence and submission. She had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to hide. What Julian did not know, and what no one knew except Marcus, was the secret she carried beneath the expertly tailored jade silk of her gown. If stories of courage found in the most desperate circumstances move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The ballroom began to fill with guests. Helena recognized many faces from her years as countess. Lady Dorothea Ashton swept past without acknowledgement, her ostrich feathers bobbing with each step. Lord and Lady Hartley paused, whispered behind gloved hands, then moved on. The cut direct, performed again and again. 6 months ago, when the decree of nullity had been granted, society had made its judgment. Julian had petitioned the ecclesiastical courts, claiming the marriage was never consummated due to her barrenness, a perjury that granted him freedom and branded her as defective. An annulled woman, even one who had been countess, was tainted, unacceptable, and invisible. Helena had expected nothing less. She found a position near a marble column draped in white silk and orange blossoms, half hidden from view, but able to observe the ceremony that would seal her replacement. The irony was not lost on her. She wore jade green, the color of new life, while all around her white flowers proclaimed Victoria's supposed purity. "Mrs. Winters," a voice said softly at her elbow. Helena turned to find Constance Fairweather, who had been her one true friend during the years at Moorland Hall. Constance's round face showed genuine pleasure, though her eyes held questions. "I did not think you would come," Constance said, keeping her voice low. "After everything." "I was invited," Helena replied, her tone neutral. "It would have been rude to refuse such a gracious gesture." Constance heard the bitter edge beneath the words. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "There are whispers, Helena. Rumors that the annulment was based on falsehoods, that Julian made accusations of infirmity he could not prove, that you were cast aside for refusing to sign some document regarding the estate." So the truth was seeping out, drop by drop. Helena felt something tight in her chest ease slightly. Rumors are dangerous things, Constance. Best not to repeat them. But if they are true, Constance pressed. Helena met her friend's gaze steadily. If they were true, what would it change? The marriage is annulled. He is Earl. The law does not care for women's truths. Before Constance could respond, a hush fell over the ballroom. Julian had entered through the far doors, resplendent in a dark blue superfine coat and cream waistcoat, his cravat tied in an intricate knot that spoke of hours before a mirror. At 35, he remained handsome in that cold, aristocratic way that had first drawn her mother's attention to the match. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of winter storms. Those eyes found Helena across the crowded room. For a moment, something flickered in them. Surprise, perhaps, that she had actually come. Or perhaps calculation. With Julian, it was always difficult to tell. He crossed the room toward her with measured steps. The crowd parted for him, as it always did, as though he carried his title like a visible cloak. Constance squeezed Helena's hand once, then melted away into the assembly. "Helena," Julian said, stopping before her with a bow that was precisely calibrated to show respect without warmth. "How unexpected. I confess I thought my invitation might go unanswered." "Did you?" Helena kept her voice light and polite. Years of training as a society wife had taught her how to smile with her mouth while her eyes remained flat. "I would not dream of missing such a momentous occasion. After all, it is not every day one's former husband takes a new wife." Something dangerous gleamed in Julian's expression. "How gracious of you. Though I notice you came alone. No escort? I had heard rumors that you were residing with Dr. Haverford in the village. How very modern of you." The implication hung in the air between them, poisonous and deliberate. Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her composure. "Dr. Haverford has been most kind in offering me accommodation. He is a gentleman of impeccable character, as you well know. He attended your father during his final illness." At the mention of his father, Julian's jaw tightened. "Yes, my father. Always so full of stories in his final days, rambling mostly. The fever, the physician said, made him imagine all sorts of impossible things." Helena held his gaze without flinching. Memory is a curious thing. Sometimes the dying remember truths the living prefer to forget. For a heartbeat, genuine fury flashed across Julian's face. Then it was gone, replaced by that cold, polished smile she knew so well. "Indeed. Well, do enjoy the festivities, Helena. I do hope the refreshments meet your standards. I know how particular you can be." He moved away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone again. Helena's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the silk of her gown. The fabric had been altered by Mrs. Talbot, the village seamstress, with such skill that the subtle expansion at the waist was invisible to casual observation. But Helena knew. She knew that beneath the jade silk and the carefully constructed corseting, her body was changing. 4 months along now. 4 months since that last terrible night before the annulment petition was filed. She had not planned it. Neither had Julian, she was certain. It had been a moment of weakness on both their parts, a final attempt at something that had never truly existed between them. The next morning, he had looked at her with such cold regret that she had known immediately it changed nothing. 3 days later, the petition was filed based on non-consummation. She was no longer Countess of Moreland. She was simply Mrs. Winters, branded as barren, with no home, no income, and no prospects. Marcus had found her in the village church, kneeling in an empty pew with nowhere else to go. He had offered his guest room without question, without judgment. When she discovered the pregnancy 2 months later, she had tried to leave, unwilling to compromise his reputation further. He had refused to let her go. "You saved my father's life once," he had said quietly, when he took ill during harvest season and you rode through a storm to fetch me. You nursed him yourself when the fever was worst. I will not abandon you now." It was more kindness than she had known in years. The ceremony began with the arrival of the bride. Victoria Sinclair was everything Helena had once been told a proper wife should be. Young, only 21, beautiful in that pale, delicate way the Tun admired, innocent, wealthy. Her father was a viscount, her mother a renowned hostess. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her white silk gown shimmering in the candlelight, her veil a waterfall of the finest Brussels lace. Helena watched from her place by the column and felt nothing. No jealousy, no pain. Only a kind of distant pity for the girl who had no idea what she was walking into. Victoria smiled up at Julian with such trust, such hope, that Helena wanted to call out a warning. But what would she say? That the man waiting at the altar was capable of great cruelty when his pride was wounded? That he valued his title and position above all human connection? That he would demand absolute obedience and punish any hint of independence? The ceremony proceeded according to ancient ritual. Vows were exchanged. Rings were blessed and placed on trembling fingers. The archbishop pronounced them man and wife. Julian kissed his bride with studied tenderness while the assembly murmured approval. It was done. The wedding breakfast was to be held in the long gallery, where tables had been laid with Moreland silver and crystal. Helena knew she should leave. She had witnessed what Julian wanted her to see. There was no reason to subject herself to further torture. But something kept her there, some instinct that whispered this day was not yet finished. She moved with the crowd toward the gallery, accepting a glass of champagne from a footman she did not recognize. Around her, conversations buzzed with the usual gossip. Who was wearing what? Who had been invited? Who had been conspicuously absent? Lady Dorothea held court near the windows, her voice carrying as she described the bride's gown in exhaustive detail. 20 yards of silk, I am told, from Lyon, and the pearls were her grandmother's. So much better than borrowed jewels. Some women must make do with what they can find, of course. The barb was aimed at Helena. She knew it. Everyone knew it. At her wedding to Julian 7 years ago, she had worn her mother's modest pearls because her family had nothing finer to offer. It had been the first of many small humiliations. Helena moved away from Lady Dorothea's poison, seeking a quieter corner. She found herself near the doors to the terrace, where fresh air might ease the tightness in her chest. But before she could step outside, a hand gripped her elbow. Hard. "Julian." "A word, if you please," he said, his voice pleasant, but his fingers pressing into her arm through the silk. "Somewhere more private." He did not wait for her agreement. He propelled her through a side door into one of the smaller drawing rooms, closing the door firmly behind them. Helena pulled her arm free and stepped back, putting the width of a settee between them. "That was unnecessary," she said coldly. "I have no wish to speak privately with you, Julian. We said all that needed saying 6 months ago. Did we?" He moved closer, his expression shifting from society charm to something harder. "I think not. I think there are still matters unresolved between us. The decree of nullity is final. What more could there be? The document my father wanted you to sign, the one you refused." Julian's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "I know you heard his mad ravings about some supposed first marriage, about a bastard son, about the title being in question, all fevered delusions of a dying man, yet you clung to them like gospel." Helena's heart beat faster, but she kept her expression calm. "Your father was perfectly lucid when he spoke to me. He showed me proof, Julian. Documents, letters, a marriage certificate that predated your mother's wedding by 2 years. Lies." Julian's composure cracked. "Lies told by a man out of his mind with pain. There is no proof. There never was. You invented this fantasy to avoid your duty as my wife. My duty? Helena's voice rose despite her attempt at control. My duty was to be silent while you ignored me for 7 years, to produce an heir you never bothered to try for, to smile while your mother insulted me daily, to sign away any claim to the truth your father entrusted to me before he died. You had one purpose in this marriage, Julian said viciously. One purpose, you failed. You could not give me a son. The least you could have done was leave quietly without spreading vicious rumors about my legitimacy. The words struck like physical blows. Helena had spent years believing the lie that she was barren, accepting the blame for their childless marriage. The discovery of her pregnancy 2 months after their separation had been shocking proof that the failure had never been hers alone. But she would not give Julian the satisfaction of knowing. Not yet. I spread no rumors, she said, with as much dignity as she could muster. I kept your father's confession to myself, as you demanded. I accepted the annulment based on your lies. I left Moorland Hall without a word of protest. What more do you want from me? Julian studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes cold and assessing. I want you gone. Completely. I want you to leave Somerset. Leave England, if you have any wisdom. Take whatever pittance you manage to save and disappear. Your presence here, in the village, living with that physician, is an embarrassment to my name. I am no longer your wife. Your name is no longer mine to embarrass. You were Countess of Moorland. Society remembers. Every time someone sees you reduced to accepting charity from a country doctor, they remember that you were once mistress of all this. He gestured broadly at the room, the house beyond. It reflects poorly on me. Helena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. You annulled our marriage, Julian. You cast me out without income or property. You made certain society knew you found me wanting in every way. And now you demand I disappear because my very existence inconveniences you? I demand you show some dignity, some proper shame. The words were too much. 7 years of swallowed hurt, of silent endurance, of accepting blame for failures that were not hers, rose up in a wave. Shame? Helena's voice shook. You speak to me of shame? When you built your entire life on a lie? When you hold a title that may not legally be yours? When you allowed your father to die without acknowledging his firstborn son? Julian's hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his face contorted with rage. You will be silent. Or what? Helena wrenched her arm away. You have no power over me now. I am not your wife. I do not depend on your goodwill or your money. You cannot hurt me anymore, Julian. He stepped closer, looming over her. Can I not? One word from me and every door in society closes to you permanently. One word and Dr. Haverford loses his position, his reputation destroyed by association with a notorious woman. Do not test me, Helena. Before she could respond, the door opened. A footman stood there, looking uncomfortable. My lord, your bride requests your presence. The first dance is to begin. Julian straightened, his expression smoothing into pleasantness with practiced ease. Of course. Tell Lady Moorland I shall attend her immediately. The footman bowed and withdrew. Julian turned back to Helena, his smile terrible. Enjoy the festivities, my dear. Do try the champagne, and remember what I said. Disappear while you still can. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Helena stood alone in the drawing room, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. She pressed her palms against her abdomen, feeling the slight roundness there, the secret proof that she was not the failure Julian had proclaimed her to be. She would not disappear, she would not hide. And before this day was done, she would make sure Julian understood that some truths could not be buried, no matter how desperately he tried. Helena returned to the long gallery. The dancing had begun, Julian leading Victoria in a graceful waltz, while guests looked on with approval. Helena found a seat near the wall, watching, waiting. Constance appeared with a plate of delicacies, pressing it into Helena's hands. "You look pale," Constance murmured. "Are you quite well?" "Well enough," Helena replied, though she touched none of the food. The nausea that had plagued her early months had passed, but her stomach churned now with anger and fear. The dancing continued. Toast after toast was raised to the happy couple. Victoria's mother, Lady Emmeline Blackwell, moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with regal grace. She was a formidable woman, tall and imposing, known for her exacting standards and her determination to see her daughter married to the highest title possible. She had achieved her goal. Her Victoria was now Countess of Moreland. As the afternoon wore on, Helena began to think nothing more would happen. Perhaps Julian's warning had been merely that, a warning, and she would be permitted to slip away without further incident. She set down her untouched champagne and rose to leave. It was then that Julian appeared at her side again, Victoria on his arm. His bride looked flushed and happy, her eyes bright with champagne and joy. "Helena," Julian said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Victoria wished to make your acquaintance. I have told her how gracious you were about our annulment, how understanding." It was a lie, of course, but Victoria smiled with such genuine warmth that Helena could not bring herself to shatter the girl's illusions. "Lady Moreland," Helena said, executing a curtsy that was perfectly calibrated. "My congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Julian speaks so kindly of you. He says you were most generous in releasing him from your union so that he might find true happiness." Victoria's innocent words cut deeper than any intentional cruelty could have. "How kind of him," Helena managed, her voice steady despite the burning in her chest. Julian's smile widened. "Indeed, we must show our appreciation for Helena's generosity. Perhaps a dance? It would be such a lovely gesture to demonstrate to everyone that there is no ill will between us." Helena opened her mouth to refuse, but Julian was already taking her hand, leading her toward the dancers. She had no choice but to follow or create a scene. As they took their positions for the cotillion, she hissed under her breath, "What game are you playing?" "No game," Julian replied pleasantly, "merely showing society how civilized we are, how above petty resentments." The music began. They moved through the figures of the dance, coming together and apart in the prescribed patterns. Each time they clasped hands, Julian's grip was just slightly too tight, a reminder of his control. Helena's jaw ached from maintaining her pleasant expression. "You look tired," Julian observed as they circled each other. "Perhaps country life does not suit you as well as you hoped." "I am quite content." "Are you? Living in that cramped cottage, dependent on another man's charity? Surely this is not the future you imagined when you married an earl." "The future I imagined died long ago, Julian. I have learned to make do with reality." They separated, moved through the next figure with other partners, then came together again. Julian leaned closer as they turned, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "I know your secret, Helena." Her heart stopped. "I have no secrets." "Do you not? Then why does Mrs. Talbot the seamstress speak of having to let out your gowns? Why does the apothecary mention you purchasing ginger root and raspberry leaf? Why do you turn green at the sight of mutton?" Helena's composure cracked. Julian saw it and smiled. "Yes, I know you are with child. The question is, whose bastard is it? The good doctor's, or perhaps some other village swain who took pity on the desperate woman?" "You know whose child it is," Helena said in a fierce whisper. Julian laughed softly. "Do I? Prove it." "Oh, wait. You cannot. Our marriage was annulled on the grounds of non-consummation. If you are pregnant, it only proves you are a whore who strayed from her vows. It proves I was right to discard you." The dance was ending. They made their final turn, bowed, separated. Julian returned to Victoria's side, leaving Helena standing alone in the middle of the floor. Conversations around her had stopped. People were staring. They had seen something in her face, some crack in her armor. Helena walked swiftly toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing escape. But she was not swift enough. Julian's voice rang out across the gallery, pitched to carry to every corner. "Helena, wait! Your gown!" She turned, confused. Julian was moving toward her with a mask of mocking concern on his face. "It fits so poorly," he sneered, loud enough for the room to hear. "I see that without my support, you have been forced to wear ill-fitting rags. Or perhaps you have simply grown fat on country fare. A countess should never burst her seams." Before she could react, he reached for her waist, his fingers catching in the altered seam Mrs. Talbot had so carefully constructed. He pulled, intending to expose her poverty and shame her for her figure. The sound of ripping silk filled the room. The clever construction that had hidden her pregnancy gave way, the fabric tearing from waist to hem. Helena gasped, instinctively covering herself, but it was too late. Everyone could see. The rounded curve of her belly, unmistakable at 4 months, pressed against the thin chemise beneath. Silence fell like a crushing weight. Julian stepped back, his expression of mockery freezing into genuine, horrified shock. He stared at her stomach, his face draining of color. He had expected to reveal corset strings and flesh grown soft with neglect. Instead, he saw the undeniable shape of a child. Lady Dorothea's voice cut through the shocked silence. "Well, it seems the fallen countess has fallen further than we knew." Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous and vicious. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and confusion. Lady Blackwell looked as though she might faint from the scandal unfolding at her daughter's wedding. Helena stood frozen, her hands pressed over her abdomen, feeling the eyes of everyone she had once called peers raking over her exposed shame. This was what Julian had wanted, to humiliate her. But in doing so, he had revealed a truth he had never intended to see. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to hide, to escape this nightmare. But as she stood there, feeling her child move within her, something changed. Something hard and bright and furious ignited in her chest. She would not run, not anymore. Helena lowered her hands slowly, deliberately. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, meeting Julian's terrified gaze across the shocked crowd. Let them see. Let them all see. She had nothing left to lose, and that made her more powerful than any of them could imagine. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent gallery. "I am with child. 4 months gone, to be precise." The crowd erupted in whispers. Julian's expression was no longer triumphant. It was the face of a man watching his own trap snap shut around his throat. Victoria grasped his arm. "Julian," she said in a small voice, "I do not understand. You said... The court said the marriage was never consummated. You swore it." Before Julian could answer, Helena spoke again. "He swore many things, Lady Morland. He swore I was barren. He swore he never touched me. He swore our marriage was null and void because no child could come of it." Julian's face darkened. "You are overwrought, Helena. Understandable given your situation. Perhaps it is best if you leave now." "Leave?" Helena's laugh was bitter. "Oh no, Julian. You tore my gown to mock me. You wanted to show the world how far I had fallen. Well, you have shown them. You have shown them the child you swore could never exist." "You are being absurd," Julian said, but his voice held an edge of desperation now. "The child is not mine. It cannot be mine." Helena moved closer to him, ignoring the torn gown, ignoring the scandalized stares. "Can it not? Then tell me, husband, former husband, I should say. Tell the court how a woman you claimed was untouched is now carrying a child. Or perhaps you should tell your innocent bride about the night before you filed for the annulment, about how you came to me one last time, speaking of regret and second chances." Victoria's face went white. "Julian?" "She is lying," Julian said quickly. "She is desperate and delusional. The child cannot be mine. We have been separated for 6 months." "Exactly 6 months," Helena agreed. "6 months ago, you petitioned for nullity. But the child was conceived the night before you filed the papers. You know this, Julian. You were there. And by the laws of this land, if a marriage is consummated and produces an heir, the annulment is based on perjury. It is invalid." The mathematical calculation was visible on people's faces as they counted backwards. 4 months pregnant, 6 months separated. But the conception date aligned perfectly with the period before the decree was absolute. Julian was not ready to concede. "Convenient how you discover this pregnancy only after our separation is final. Only after you have secured your position in Dr. Haverford's household. Tell me, Helena, does he know the child is mine? Or have you let him believe it his?" It was a masterstroke of manipulation. In one question, Julian had planted doubt in everyone's mind and sullied both Helena's and Marcus's reputations. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Dr. Haverford is a gentleman of honor. He has offered me nothing but shelter and protection. Unlike you, he does not trade in lies and manipulation." "Lies?" Julian's voice rose. "You speak to me of lies? When you have spent 6 months harboring my father's mad delusions, spreading rumors about my legitimacy, trying to destroy everything I have built?" And there it was, the real source of his fury. Not the pregnancy, not the annulment, the threat to his title. Helena felt the shift in the room, the way people leaned forward, sensing some deeper scandal about to be revealed. She could stop now. She could walk away, preserve what little remained of her dignity, protect Marcus from further association with her disgrace. It would be the safe choice, the wise choice. But safety and wisdom had brought her nothing but suffering. "Mad delusions?" Helena's voice rang clear. "Is that what you call your father's deathbed confession? His admission that he contracted a legal marriage to Sarah Hartley in 1780, that a son named James was born of that union in 1781, and that the marriage was never legally annulled despite your family's claims?" The room erupted. Conversations exploded in every direction. Julian lunged forward as if to silence her physically, but Lord Ashton and 2 other men stepped between them, their faces grave. "What is she saying?" Lord Ashton demanded. "Moreland, what is this about a first marriage?" Julian's composure shattered completely. "She is mad, deranged. My father was ill, out of his mind with fever. He said many things that made no sense." "He was perfectly lucid," Helena said firmly. "I was there. I held his hand as he confessed the great sin of his life. How he had loved Sarah Hartley, a merchant's daughter. How they married in a small church in Devon. How your grandmother discovered the union and threatened to disinherit him unless he set Sarah aside. How he was told the marriage would be annulled, but it never was. Sarah was paid off, sent away. Their son was raised believing he was illegitimate, denied his birthright." "Lies!" Julian shouted. "Vicious, baseless lies meant to destroy me." "Then why?" Helena asked quietly. "Did you demand I sign a document swearing I would never speak of it? Why did you threaten me when I refused? Why did you cast me aside rather than risk me revealing what I knew?" The logic was inescapable. If the claims were truly baseless, Julian would have had no reason to fear them. His very desperation proved their validity. Lady Blackwell stepped forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "If there is any truth to these allegations, they must be investigated. My daughter's position, her future, depends upon the legitimacy of her husband's title." "There is nothing to investigate," Julian insisted. "No proof exists. Whatever my father thought he remembered in his illness died with him." Helena met his wild gaze steadily. "Are you certain of that, Julian? Are you absolutely certain your father left no proof behind?" She saw it then, the flicker of uncertainty. He had searched, she was certain. After his father's death, he had torn apart the old Earl's chambers, his study, his private papers. But he had not found what he sought, because the old Earl had been cleverer than his son gave him credit for. "Where is it?" Julian demanded in a low voice. "What did he give you?" "Nothing," Helena said truthfully. The old Earl had given her nothing, but he had shown her where to find it. A panel in the library, behind the portrait of his grandfather. A small cavity containing a leather case. Inside, papers that would destroy his son's world. She had taken nothing when she fled Moorland Hall, but she had committed every detail to memory, including the exact location of that hiding place. Julian seemed to sense her thoughts. If such documents existed, they would be in this house. And this house is mine, every room, every paper, every secret. Mine. For now, Helena said softly. The confrontation was broken by Victoria's sudden sob. The young bride turned and fled from the gallery, her mother hurrying after her. The guests began to murmur, moving in clusters toward the doors. The wedding celebration was over, shattered by revelations no one had anticipated. Lord Ashton approached Julian with grave formality. "Moorland, these are serious accusations. The legitimacy of your title is not a matter to be dismissed lightly. I recommend you consult with your solicitors immediately." Julian's jaw worked. "There is nothing to consult about. The accusations are false. I am Earl of Moorland by law and right." "Then you will have no objection to an inquiry," Lord Ashton said, "for the sake of your bride and her family, if nothing else." Helena watched Julian struggle with his pride. To agree to an inquiry was to admit the possibility of doubt, but to refuse would make him appear guilty. He was trapped. Before he could respond, a voice spoke from the doorway. "Perhaps I might be of assistance." Helena's heart leaped. Marcus. Dr. Marcus Haverford stood in the entrance to the gallery, his tall frame filling the doorway, his kind face grave with concern. He moved directly to Helena's side, removing his coat and draping it around her shoulders to cover the torn gown. "Thank you for coming," Helena whispered. "Did you think I would not?" Marcus replied quietly. Then he turned to address the room. "I am Dr. Marcus Haverford. Some of you may know me. I attended the late Earl of Moorland during his final illness. I was present for many of his conversations with Mrs. Winters." Julian's face went white. "You have no standing here. This is a private matter." "Is it?" Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "When a man's legitimacy and title are questioned, it becomes a matter of public record. I can attest that the late Earl was lucid and coherent during his conversations with Mrs. Winters. I heard him speak of regret, of a son denied, of a marriage that haunted his conscience." "Hearsay," Julian spat, "worth nothing." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, "but combined with documentary evidence, it might prove quite valuable." Helena stared at him. Documentary evidence? She had told Marcus what the old Earl revealed, but she had never mentioned specific documents. How could he know? Marcus met her confused gaze and smiled slightly. "Your late father-in-law was my patient for 3 years before his death. We spoke often. He trusted me with many confidences, including the location of certain papers he wished preserved but dared not keep in obvious places." Understanding flooded through Helena. The old Earl had given the information to Marcus as well. Insurance, perhaps, in case Julian found and destroyed what was hidden in the library. Or perhaps simple prudence, ensuring the truth survived even if he did not. Julian looked from Marcus to Helena, his expression wild. "This is conspiracy, fraud. You planned this together, turned my dying father against me, forged documents to steal my inheritance." "Forged?" Lord Ashton's voice was sharp. "That is a serious accusation, Moorland. If Dr. Haverford possesses genuine documents predating your parents' marriage, they can be verified by experts." "I possess nothing myself," Marcus clarified. but I know where such documents may be found. And I suspect Mrs. Winters knows as well. Helena nodded slowly. The library. Behind the portrait of the third Earl, there is a panel, cleverly concealed. Your father showed me the mechanism the day before he died. Julian moved as if to run from the room, but Lord Ashton's hand on his shoulder stopped him. I think it best we examine this together, Morland, for all our sakes. The procession to the library was surreal. Julian and Lord Ashton led the way, followed by Lady Blackwell, several other prominent guests, and finally Helena and Marcus. Constance appeared at Helena's other side, offering silent support. The library of Moorland Hall was a magnificent room, 2 stories tall with galleries running along 3 walls, books bound in leather lining every surface. The air smelled of beeswax, old parchment, and the heavy weight of secrets kept too long. The portrait of the third Earl hung over the fireplace, a stern-faced man in wig and formal dress. Helena had passed it 1,000 times during her years as Countess, never knowing what lay behind it. There is nothing there, Julian said desperately. My father was ill, confused. This is all fantasy. But Helena moved to the fireplace, running her fingers along the carved frame of the portrait. She found the small indentation the old Earl had shown her and pressed it firmly. A sharp click echoed in the silence. The painting swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing the dark stone of the wall behind. Set into the stone was a small iron door, no larger than a book. It had a keyhole, but no key. It will be locked, Julian said, with something like relief. Without the key, it cannot be opened. Marcus reached into his waistcoat and produced a small brass key. Your father gave me this 3 days before he died. He said I would know when to use it. Julian made a sound low in his throat, part rage and part despair. Marcus fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if oiled regularly. The iron door swung open with a groan of protesting metal. Inside was a leather document case, cracked with age and covered in a fine layer of gray dust. Marcus lifted it out carefully and carried it to the large desk near the window. Under the watchful eyes of everyone present, he opened the case. Documents spilled out. Yellowed papers covered in faded ink. The topmost was a marriage certificate, dated the 15th of June, 1780, recording the union of Edmund Winters and Sarah Hartley at St. Michael's Church in the village of Ashford, Devon. Below it, a baptismal record for James Edmund Winters, born the 3rd of March, 1781. Letters followed. Sarah's careful script pleading for acknowledgement of her son. Responses from solicitors offering money, but not recognition. An agreement signed by Edmund Winters promising a pension in exchange for Sarah's silence. And finally, a document dated 1799, written in Edmund's own hand. A confession. An acknowledgement that his marriage to Sarah had never been legally dissolved, that his subsequent marriage to Julian's mother was therefore invalid, that Julian himself, though beloved, was not legitimate in the eyes of the law. The silence in the library was absolute. Lord Ashton lifted the confession, reading it through twice. This is witnessed, he said quietly, by 2 solicitors and a clergyman. All dead now, I believe, but their signatures and seals are here. If genuine, this document is legally binding. He turned his gaze to Julian, his expression severe. My lord, Mr. Winters, I must ask you to surrender the signet ring. Julian recoiled, clutching his left hand to his chest. No, it is mine. I am the Earl. Not if these documents are true, Lord Ashton said firmly. The ring belongs to the title. Until this matter is resolved, it must remain in safe custody. Julian looked around the room, seeing no allies. Even Lady Blackwell had stepped away from him. With shaking hands, he pulled at the heavy gold ring on his finger. It was tight, as if the gold itself resisted leaving him. He tugged violently, his face reddening with the effort and humiliation until it finally slid free. He slammed it onto the desk next to the damning papers, the sound ringing like a funeral bell. "It cannot be," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am Earl of Moreland. I have been Earl for a year. The title is mine." "The title belongs to the legitimate heir," Lord Ashton corrected gently. "If this James Winters can be found, and if these documents are verified as genuine, then he is the rightful Earl. You, I fear, are not." Victoria's voice came from the doorway, small and broken, but gaining strength. "Then I am not a countess. I am married to a man with no title, no legitimacy." Julian looked at his bride, seeing the horror and disgust in her face. "Victoria, please. This changes nothing between us. I love you." But Victoria stepped back, her mother's arm around her shoulders. She looked at Helena, at the torn dress and the evident pregnancy, and then back at Julian. "It changes everything. You lied to the church to annul your first marriage. You lied to me about your past. And now, because of your deceit, any children we might have had would be bastards, just as you are. I will not bring children into a world where their name is a lie." "I knew nothing," Julian shouted. "My father kept his guilty secrets from me. I believed myself legitimate. I am the victim here." Helena, who had been silent through the examination of the documents, finally spoke. "You knew, Julian. Your father tried to tell you before he died. You refused to listen. You threatened him, told him his ravings would destroy everything. I heard you. And when he confided in me instead, you tried to force my silence. You knew the truth. You simply chose to bury it." The accusation hung in the air. Julian had no answer. His silence was confirmation enough. Lord Ashton gathered the documents carefully. These must be examined by proper authorities, the College of Heralds, legal experts. If they are genuine, a search must be made for this James Winters. He would be, 35 years old now? 35, Marcus confirmed. The late Earl believed him to be living somewhere in the north, Durham possibly, working as a merchant, unaware of his true parentage. "Then he must be found," Lady Blackwell said firmly. "My daughter's honor depends upon the truth being known. If her marriage to Lord Moreland is invalid due to his illegitimacy, it must be annulled immediately." Victoria began to weep in earnest. Her wedding day, meant to be the happiest of her life, had become a nightmare of scandal and shame. Helena felt pity for the girl despite everything. She had been innocent, a pawn in Julian's desperate attempt to secure his position before the truth emerged. The guests began to disperse, hurrying away to spread the gossip. The scandal would be the talk of London within days, the Earl of Moreland exposed as illegitimate, his marriage potentially invalid, his annulled wife pregnant with the only true heir he ever produced. And underneath it all, the mystery of a lost heir, a rightful Earl living in obscurity. Helena found herself alone with Marcus in the library as Julian was led away by Lord Ashton for further questioning. She sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. "I cannot believe it is done, that the truth is finally known." Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. "You were magnificent, terrifying, and magnificent." "I was desperate," Helena corrected. "If Julian had not torn my gown, I would have left quietly. I had no plan to reveal anything." "Perhaps," Marcus said gently. "Or perhaps you knew deep down that this confrontation was necessary, that the lies had to be exposed." Helena looked down at their clasped hands. "What happens now? To me? To this child?" "Now," Marcus said firmly, "you come home with me. You rest. You let yourself heal. And when the child is born, we will decide together what is best. Julian will deny it is his. He will never acknowledge the baby. Let him deny it. The timing will speak for itself, And if necessary, I will testify that you were living as a guest in my household for 2 months before you discovered the pregnancy, that you had no other relations, that the child can only be Julian's, conceived before the decree was absolute." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that? Tie yourself to this scandal? Ruin your reputation for me?" Marcus smiled, though there was sadness in it. "My dear Helena, my reputation among the gentry is already gone. They will not employ a physician who harbors a fallen woman. But the villagers, the farmers, the people who truly need care, they judge a man by his hands and his heart, not his guests. We will have a simpler life, perhaps, but an honest one. Besides, I have loved you since the day Julian brought you to Moorland Hall as his bride 8 years ago. If I must weather scandal to see you happy, it seems a small price." The confession stunned her. "Marcus, I did not know." "I made certain you did not. You were married. It would have been improper to speak, but you are free now, Helena, and I am a patient man. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here." Helena could not speak past the tightness in her throat. She squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his steadfast kindness. They left Moorland Hall together as twilight fell. Behind them, the house that had been Helena's prison blazed with lights and chaos. Before them, the village and Marcus's modest cottage waited, humble but safe. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and scandal. The documents from the library were examined by experts and declared genuine. Investigators were dispatched to Durham to search for James Winters. Society buzzed with speculation and gossip. Victoria's family demanded an annulment of her marriage to Julian, claiming fraud and deception. Helena remained in the cottage, sheltered from the worst of it by Marcus's care. Her pregnancy progressed normally. The sickness passed. She felt the baby move, a flutter like wings inside her. Girl or boy, she did not know. But she found herself hoping for a daughter, someone who would never have to endure what she had suffered. It was late June when the investigators returned with news. They had found James Winters. He was indeed living in Durham, running a modest but successful textile business. He was married with a young family, and he had no knowledge of his true parentage. His mother, Sarah, had died 5 years earlier, taking her secrets to the grave. She had told James only that his father was a gentleman who could not acknowledge him, that she had been given a pension to keep silent. James had grown up believing himself a bastard, working hard to build a respectable life despite the stain on his birth. When the investigators presented him with the documents proving his legitimacy, proving that his mother had been legally married, that he was the rightful Earl of Moorland, James had wept. Not for the title or the property, though those were now his by law, but for his mother, whose honor had been restored too late for her to know it. The news reached Moorland Hall in early July. A formal inquiry was convened. The College of Heralds examined every shred of evidence. Legal scholars debated precedent and law. In the end, the decision was unanimous. James Edmund Winters was the legitimate son of the 5th Earl of Moorland. He was therefore the rightful 6th Earl. Julian's father's second marriage had been invalid. Julian himself, though raised as heir, had no legal claim to the title or property. Julian fought the decision with every resource at his command. He hired solicitors, made appeals, argued that years of possession should grant him some right. But the law was clear. Legitimacy could not be manufactured or assumed. James was the heir. Julian was not. By August, it was over. Julian was stripped of his title, his property, his position. He was granted a modest pension, enough to live as a gentleman, but nothing more. Victoria's family secured an annulment of her marriage, citing fraud and misrepresentation. The girl returned to her parents' home, her reputation damaged but not destroyed. She would recover in time. Julian himself seemed to age 10 years in a matter of weeks. The cold arrogance that had defined him crumbled, leaving behind a bitter shell of a man. He took rooms in a small house on the edge of the village. too proud to flee entirely, but too ashamed to show his face in society. Helena saw him only once more, in early September. She was walking in the village with Constance when he emerged from the apothecary's shop. For a moment, they stood face to face on the street. "Helena," he said, his voice hollow. "Julian," she replied neutrally. He looked at her rounded belly, now heavy and obvious at 8 months. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of regret and avarice. "I never meant for any of this. You must believe that." "What I believe no longer matters," Helena said quietly. "What is done is done." "The child," Julian said hesitantly, stepping closer. "Is it truly mine? If it is a boy, he would be my blood, my only link to the line." Helena met his gaze steadily, and for the first time she saw him not as a monster, but as something far more pathetic, a man who had burned down his own house to warm his hands. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "According to the lies you told to discard me, you have no child. You swore to the court I was barren. You swore we never touched. By your own legal declaration, this child cannot be yours." Julian flinched as if struck. "But the blood." "Grace is a Haverford in all but name," Helena cut him off, her voice like steel. "You are a man without an heir, without a title, and soon without a memory. You destroyed the only legitimate legacy you ever created." She delivered the cut direct, looking through him as if he were made of glass, and walked past him without looking back. Constance squeezed her arm in silent support. Behind them, Julian stood alone on the village street, a man who had lost everything because he had been too afraid to face one simple truth. In late September, as the leaves began to turn to gold and russet, James Winters arrived at Moorland Hall to take possession of his inheritance. He came with his wife Catherine and their young son. He was a tall man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, unused to the trappings of nobility, but determined to learn. One of his first acts as Earl was to visit Helena. He came to Marcus's cottage on a bright October morning, carrying a leather folder that she recognized immediately. The documents from the hidden panel. "Mrs. Winters," he said formally, though his manner was warm. "I hope you will forgive my intrusion. I wanted to thank you." Helena invited him into the small parlor, offering tea that he accepted gratefully. They sat together in the modest room, the new Earl and the former Countess, while Marcus discreetly withdrew to his study. "I do not know what there is to thank me for, my lord," Helena said. "I merely told the truth." James shook his head. "You gave my mother justice. For 35 years, she lived with the shame of being called my father's mistress. She died believing I was illegitimate, that our family name was tainted by scandal. Because of you, the world now knows she was a lawfully wedded wife, that she was wronged, not wicked, that I am not a bastard, but a son." His voice broke on the last words. Helena felt tears prick her own eyes. "Your mother was very brave to raise you alone. She must have loved your father very much." "She did," James said softly. "She kept his letters, you know. Everyone he sent over the years. Promises he could not keep. Apologies that changed nothing. But she kept them, tied with ribbon, as if they were precious. I found them after she died and did not understand. Now I do." He opened the leather folder and withdrew a heavy parchment sealed with wax. "This is not a letter. This is a deed of annuity. I have established a trust for your child. It is substantial enough to ensure that whether boy or girl, they will never know want and will have a dowry or inheritance befitting a grandchild of the Moorland line." Helena stared at the document. "My lord, this is too generous. I cannot accept." "Please," he insisted, pressing it into her hands. "You lost everything because you chose honor over silence. Let me restore at least a portion of what was taken from you. Consider it not charity, but justice. This child is my kin, and I will not see them suffer for the sins of their father." Helena accepted the deed with trembling hands. It represented more than money. It was recognition. It was safety. "Thank you, my lord," she whispered. James smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters, for giving me my name." After he left, Helena sat alone in the parlor, the weight of the document heavy in her lap. She had not fought for reward. She had fought because she could not bear to live with lies anymore. But this unexpected gift meant freedom. Real freedom. Not just the hollow kind that came with separation. Marcus found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face. He knelt beside her chair in concern. "Helena, what is wrong? Did Lord Morland upset you?" "No," Helena managed through her tears. "No, he was kind. He was generous beyond measure. These are not tears of sorrow, Marcus. They are relief and gratitude and hope." Marcus took her hands, his expression tender. "Then they are the best kind of tears." Helena's daughter was born on the 23rd of September, 1816, in the cottage bedroom with Marcus attending the birth, and Constance holding her hand through the pains. The baby came quickly, lusty and strong, with a crown of dark hair and gray eyes that would later turn hazel. Helena named her Grace, for the grace she had found in the darkest moments of her life. Julian was informed of the birth by letter. He sent no reply. He never acknowledged the child. In his world, he had legally erased her existence to save himself, and in doing so, he had lost her forever. But in Helena's world, Grace was everything. The living proof that she was not the barren failure Julian had claimed. The tangible hope for a better future. The tiny hand that reached for her mother's finger with absolute trust taught Helena what love truly meant. Marcus was a constant presence those first months, helping with night feedings, walking the floor with a colicky baby, reassuring Helena when exhaustion made her doubt herself. He asked nothing in return. He simply loved them both with a quiet steadfastness that healed wounds Helena had not known she carried. It was not until Grace was 6 months old that Marcus spoke of marriage. They were in the garden behind the cottage, early spring sunshine warm on their faces. Grace lay on a blanket, watching butterflies with fascinated eyes. Helena sat nearby, mending one of Marcus's shirts while he tended to the vegetables he had planted. "I have been thinking," Marcus said without preamble, "that it might be time for us to consider making our arrangement more permanent." Helena's needle stilled. "Permanent?" Marcus set down his trowel and came to sit beside her on the bench. "Helena, I know you have been through horrors. I know trust does not come easily after what Julian did to you. But I have loved you for 8 years. I have watched you grow from a frightened bride into a woman of extraordinary courage. I have held your daughter in my arms and felt my heart break with tenderness. If you will have me, I would be honored to be your husband, and Grace's father, if you will allow it." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, you could have any woman, someone young and untainted by scandal, someone who could give you children of your own. I want no other woman," Marcus said simply. "I want you, scandal and all. And as for children, I would be proud to claim Grace as my own. If her biological father is too much a fool to treasure her, then I will be the father she deserves." Helena set aside her mending and took his hands. "I am afraid," she confessed, "afraid to try again, afraid to trust, afraid that I will fail somehow." "Then we will be afraid together," Marcus said gently, "and we will succeed together. Not because we are perfect, but because we choose to be honest, to be kind, to build something real rather than something false." Helena looked into his gray eyes, seeing only sincerity and love. No calculation, no hidden agenda, just a good man offering his heart without conditions. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, Marcus, I will marry you." They wed quietly in August of 1817, with Constance and James Morland as witnesses. Grace, now nearly a year old and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, was present in Constance's arms, making happy sounds during the vows. It was nothing like Helena's first wedding. No grand ceremony, no hundreds of guests, no cold exchange of property and title. Just two people making promises they intended to keep, witnessed by friends who wished them well. Helena wore a simple gown of blue muslin. Marcus wore his Sunday best. They spoke their vows in the village church where Helena had once knelt in despair and now stood in joy. When Marcus kissed her as his wife, Helena felt something inside her chest release. A tension she had carried for so long, it had become part of her. She was free, truly free, free to love and be loved, free to raise her daughter in kindness instead of cruelty, free to build a life based on truth instead of lies. The years that followed were not without challenges. Society did not quickly forget scandal. There were those who would always whisper about the annulled countess who married her physician. But in the small village where they lived, Marcus was respected and Helena was accepted. They built a life together that was rich in everything that mattered, even if it lacked grand titles and vast estates. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who called Marcus Papa and had no memory of the man whose blood ran in her veins. When she was old enough to understand, Helena told her the truth about her birth. But it changed nothing. Marcus was her father in every way that mattered. Julian remained in the village for 3 more years, growing more bitter and isolated with each passing season. He never remarried. He never acknowledged Grace. He lived in his small house on the edge of respectability, a ghost of his former self. In 1820, he died suddenly of an apoplexy, alone except for his manservant. He was 40 years old. No one mourned him except Victoria, who had clung to some romantic memory of the man she thought she had married. She never remarried either, living quietly with her parents until her own death many years later. It was Grace who brought news of Julian's death to Helena. At 4 years old, she had heard village gossip and asked her mother what it meant. Helena sat her daughter down and explained that the man who had given her life had passed away. "Should we be sad?" Grace asked seriously. Helena considered the question carefully. "We can be sad for any life cut short, for any soul that could not find peace, but we need not mourn what was never truly there." "I have Papa Marcus," Grace said, with the simple wisdom of childhood. "That is enough." "Yes, darling," Helena agreed, pulling her daughter close. "That is more than enough." 2 years later, in 1822, James Morland and his wife visited again. He had grown into his role as Earl with surprising grace, balancing his merchant's practicality with the demands of his title. His son was now 7, bright and full of questions about the estate he would one day inherit. Over tea in the cottage parlor, James spoke of his plans for Moorland Hall. He had opened the libraries to scholars. He had improved the cottages on his lands and raised wages for his tenants. He had established a charity in his mother's name to help women and children left without support. "I want the Moorland name to mean something good," he said, "to stand for justice instead of cruelty, for truth instead of lies." Helena smiled. "Your mother would be proud." "As would my father, I think," James said quietly. "Despite his failings, he tried to do right in the end. He trusted you with the truth, and you honored that trust." At great cost, Constance observed from her seat by the window. She was a frequent visitor still, her friendship with Helena one of the few ties that had survived from the old days. "All truth has cost," Helena replied, "but silence has a greater price. I learned that the hard way." As if summoned by talk of truth and cost, Grace wandered into the room, her dark curls bouncing as she climbed into Helena's lap. James watched the child with gentle eyes. "She looks like you," he said to Helena. "The set of her chin, the directness of her gaze." "She has her father's eyes," Helena said neutrally. It was true. Grace had inherited Julian's gray eyes, though thankfully little else of him. A fortunate combination, then, James said tactfully. Beauty with spirit. Grace studied the Earl with open curiosity. "Are you really a lord?" she asked. "I am," James confirmed with a smile. "Do you have a castle?" "A very large house that some might call a castle." "Do you have horses?" "Many horses." Grace considered this. "Then you must be very lucky." James laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I am indeed, young lady, though I think your mother might be the truly lucky one, to have such a clever daughter." After the Morlands left, Helena sat in the garden with Marcus, watching Grace play with a wooden doll he had carved for her birthday. The summer evening was soft with twilight, the air scented with roses and lavender. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "The life you gave up, the title, the position?" Helena was silent for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. "I regret the years I wasted trying to be someone I was not, the years I remained silent when I should have spoken, the years I believed the lies Julian told about my worth." She turned to look at her husband, this good man who had loved her without condition. "But I do not regret the choices that led me here, to this garden, this cottage, this life with you and Grace." Marcus took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am a selfish man. I cannot bring myself to regret Julian's cruelty because it brought you to me." "Not his cruelty," Helena corrected gently. "My courage. I could have signed his document. I could have kept silent as he demanded. I chose truth instead, and that choice led me here." "Then I am grateful for your courage," Marcus said, lifting her hand to his lips. They sat together as darkness fell, watching their daughter play, listening to the evening sounds of the village. It was a simple life, far removed from the grandeur Helena had once known as Countess. But it was real, honest, built on foundations of trust and love rather than title and transaction. Later that night, after Grace had been tucked into bed with her wooden doll and a story, Helena stood in the doorway of the room she shared with Marcus. He was already in bed, reading by candlelight, his spectacles perched on his nose. "Thank you," Helena said softly. Marcus looked up, his expression quizzical. "For what, my love?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for offering shelter when I had nowhere to go, for loving Grace as your own, for choosing me every day, even when the cost was high." Marcus set aside his book and held out his hand. Helena crossed to him, sitting on the edge of the bed, letting him pull her close. "There is no cost to loving you, Helena, only joy, only the deepest gratitude that you trusted me with your heart after it had been so badly bruised." Helena rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and herbs, and the faint smell of the garden he tended so carefully. "I never believed in second chances before. I thought once a life was ruined, it could never be rebuilt." "Not rebuilt," Marcus murmured against her hair. "Remade, into something better than it was before, stronger for having been broken and healed." Helena closed her eyes, letting the truth of his words settle into her bones. She had been the Countess of Morland, mistress of a grand estate, wife to an earl. She had lost everything, and in losing it, she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself, her voice, her strength, her capacity to stand firm in truth even when the cost was devastating. And she had found love. Real love, not the pale imitation she had accepted in her first marriage. Love that asked nothing except to be allowed to care. Love that saw her not as property or possession, but as a person worthy of respect and tenderness. The next morning, Helena woke to find Grace already awake, sitting on the floor of the bedroom playing with her doll. Marcus was in the kitchen, the smell of bread baking filling the cottage. Sunlight streamed through the windows, promising another beautiful day. Helena dressed and went downstairs, finding Marcus at the table reading the weekly newspaper from Taunton. He looked up and smiled as she entered, the kind of smile that still made her heart skip after 2 years of marriage. "There is news," he said, folding the paper. "Lord Ashton has retired from Parliament. His son will take his seat." Helena poured herself tea, settling into the chair across from Marcus. Change comes to everyone, eventually. "Indeed," Marcus agreed. "The paper also mentions that Victoria Sinclair has become engaged again, to a baronet from Yorkshire." Helena felt a flicker of sympathy for the girl. "I hope she will be happy this time. She deserves happiness after what Julian put her through." "As do you," Marcus said quietly. "Are you happy, Helena?" Helena looked around the simple cottage kitchen, at the table where they shared meals, at the hearth where they sat in the evenings, at the doorway where Grace would soon appear, hungry for breakfast and full of questions about the day ahead. "I am," Helena said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Then, I consider my life well spent." Grace tumbled down the stairs at that moment, her nightgown askew, her hair a wild tangle. "Mama! Papa! Can we go to the meadow today? Please! I want to pick flowers!" Helena laughed, rising to scoop her daughter into her arms. "After breakfast, little one, and after you let me brush that bird's nest you call hair." Grace squirmed but submitted to her mother's gentle hands. As Helena worked the tangles free, she thought of Julian. Was he watching from wherever the dead went? Could he see what his cruelty had wrought? The woman he had tried to destroy had become stronger than he ever was. The child he refused to acknowledge was loved more than he had ever been loved. And the title he had fought so desperately to keep was now held by a better man, one who used power with wisdom instead of wielding it as a weapon. Justice, Helena thought, took many forms. Sometimes it came through courts and laws. Sometimes it came through time and truth. And sometimes it came through the simple act of building a good life from the wreckage of a bad one. She finished brushing Grace's hair and tied it back with a ribbon. "There. Now you look like a proper young lady." Grace made a face. "I do not want to be a proper young lady. I want to be an explorer." Marcus laughed from his place at the table. "Then an explorer you shall be." After breakfast, they ate together, the small family that had been forged from scandal and pain and unexpected kindness. When the meal was done, they walked to the meadow, hand in hand. Grace ran ahead, chasing butterflies and shrieking with delight when she found a patch of wild roses. Helena and Marcus followed more slowly, content to walk in comfortable silence. At the edge of the meadow, Helena paused and looked back toward the village. Somewhere beyond the trees, Moorland Hall stood grand and imposing, but it no longer held any power over her. It was just a house, stone and timber and glass, nothing more. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, reading her thoughts as he so often did. Helena turned to him, this man who had given her everything by asking for nothing. "Only one," she said softly. Marcus's expression grew concerned. "What is it?" "I regret that it took me so long to understand what love truly is. If I had known earlier, I might have saved myself years of suffering." Marcus cupped her face in his hands. "But would you have valued it as you do now? Would you have recognized it for the gift it is?" Helena considered this, then shook her head. "Perhaps not. Perhaps I needed to experience cruelty to fully appreciate kindness, to know falseness, to treasure truth." "Then it was not time wasted," Marcus said gently. "Merely time needed to prepare you for joy." Helena kissed him, there in the meadow with Grace laughing nearby and the summer sun warm on their faces. It was a kiss of gratitude and love and profound relief. The relief of finally being seen, of finally being home. When they broke apart, Grace was calling for them to come see a particularly large butterfly she had discovered. They went to her, exclaiming over the orange and black wings, the delicate antennae. Grace cupped her hands carefully around the insect, then opened them to let it fly free. "Why did you let it go?" Marcus asked. "You could have kept it." Grace looked at him as though he had said something foolish. "But Papa, you cannot keep beautiful things in cages. They die. You must let them be free." Helena felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's wisdom. Out of the mouths of children came truth. She had been caged in her first marriage, dying slowly of neglect and cruelty. It had taken courage to break free. But freedom, once claimed, was the sweetest gift of all. They spent the afternoon in the meadow, making chains of wildflowers and watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they walked back to the cottage, Grace chattering about everything she had seen and done. That evening, after Grace was asleep and the cottage was quiet, Helena sat at the small writing desk in the parlor. She took out paper and pen, dipping the nib in ink. For a long moment, she sat there, considering what to write. Then she began. "My dearest Grace," she wrote, "I am writing this story for you so that one day you may understand where you came from, and more importantly, where you are going. This is not a story of princes and castles, though there were castles. It is not a story of evil villains, though there was cruelty. It is a story of a woman who learned that her worth was not determined by title or position, that her voice mattered even when the world tried to silence her. I was Countess of Moorland once. I lived in a grand house with servants and silver and all the trappings of noble life, and I was more alone than I have ever been in our simple cottage with your father and you. If you ever feel trapped, my darling girl, know that there is always a way out. It may not be easy. It may cost you everything you thought you valued. But on the other side of that terrible cost is freedom. The freedom to be yourself, to speak truth, to love and be loved without conditions. I lost a title and gained a life. I lost position and gained purpose. I lost everything I thought mattered and found what truly does. Do not be afraid to stand up for truth. Do not be afraid to walk away from cruelty, even when it wears a crown. Do not be afraid to accept kindness when it is offered, even if you think you do not deserve it. You deserve it. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve a life built on truth instead of lies. I know this because I lived the alternative. And I promise you, a difficult truth is better than a comfortable lie. Every single time. With all my love, your mother." Helena signed her name at the bottom. Mrs. Helena Haverford, not Countess. Not even Mrs. Winters, the annulled woman society had scorned. But Helena Haverford, wife to a good man, mother to a beloved daughter, woman who had found her own strength in the wreckage of her old life. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her journal. Perhaps one day Grace would read it. Perhaps one day someone else who needed those words would find them. But for now, it was enough to have written them, to have claimed her own story and told it in her own voice. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression tender. "Writing in your journal again?" "Telling my story," Helena corrected, "for posterity, or perhaps just for myself, to remember how far I have come." Marcus crossed to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You are remarkable, Helena Haverford. Did you know that?" Helena leaned back against him, closing her eyes. "I am simply a woman who refused to stay silent. There is nothing remarkable about that, or perhaps there should not be. Perhaps every woman should feel free to speak her truth." "In a better world they would," Marcus agreed. "But we live in this world, and in this world, your courage was extraordinary." Helena opened her eyes and looked up at her husband. "Our daughters will live in a better world, Grace and all the girls who come after, because women like me refused to be silenced, because men like you chose to listen, because people like Lord Moorland chose truth over convenience. A better world," Marcus murmured. "What a beautiful legacy to leave." Helena stood and turned into her husband's embrace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Society would never fully forget her scandal. There would always be those who whispered and judged. But tonight, in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who loved her, in a home built on honesty, in a life that, though small by society's standards, was rich beyond measure in everything that truly mattered. She had torn down an earl's lies and exposed his stolen title. But more importantly, she had torn down the lies she had been told about herself. That she was worthless, unlovable, unworthy. Those lies were as false as Julian's claim to his title, and just as thoroughly destroyed. Thank you for journeying with us through this tale of courage and truth. If you believe in second chances and stories where speaking truth leads to freedom, please subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories of resilience, love, and the power of refusing to be silenced.